So a few months ago, I did a video where I asked the question, what if Luffy fought Blackbeard directly after leaving Wano? More specifically, what if Luffy took the same route that Law took and ran into Blackbeard instead? How that fight would look, and who would win? This video is a similar what if scenario, which leads me to the topic of this video. What if Eustass Kid took the same path as the Strawhats and went to Egghead Island? Or, what if he took the same path as Law and fought Blackbeard? Could the Kid Pirates succeed where the Heart Pirates failed and topple the Blackbeard Pirates? Or could they conquer the many obstacles on Egghead Island? That is what we are going to find out in this video. Opinions ahead? Let's get started. Since there is a lot going on in Egghead Island, we are going to come back to it later. Instead, we have the first scenario. What if Kid took Law's path and ran into Blackbeard? How does this fight go down? Overall, I see the Kid Pirates putting up a better fight against the Blackbeard Pirates than the Heart Pirates did. Law's crew is not very dependable, but Kid has Killer. Killer has solid feats in the Wano arc, easily making him one of the strongest supernovas. And Kid himself has many impressive feats, from his fights against Big Mom and Kaido. Blackbeard jumped Law with less than half of his crew, so the same applies in this situation. When looking at this scenario, Blackbeard vs Kid is very interesting. Law and Kid are relative to each other, but they do have different strengths and weaknesses. Kid does have the edge in durability and endurance, and I would argue he has the edge in destructive capabilities as well. The added durability and endurance would allow Kid to take more damage and stay in the fight longer than Law did. Kid showcased a lot of attacks during the Wano arc, and although many of them were not effective against Big Mom and Kaido, the same can't be said about Blackbeard. Blackbeard lacks the insane durability that Kaido and Big Mom both possess, so every attack that Kid lands will do serious damage to Blackbeard. Blackbeard also mentioned in his fight with Ace that the Darkness Fruit causes him to take more damage, making it even worse in this matchup. Even though Blackbeard can turn off Kid's Devil Fruit, he has to make physical contact to do that, and in this matchup, that could be very hard for Blackbeard. Kid could always place metal in between himself and Blackbeard to prevent Blackbeard from turning off his Devil Fruit. Kid is also able to fly using Punk Rotten, making it even harder for Blackbeard to reach Kid to turn off his Devil Fruit. In his fight against Ace, Blackbeard was able to absorb an entire town with the Darkness Fruit, so I would argue that he could also absorb the metal that Kid uses to fight with, taking away Kid's resources over time. It is also very interesting how these Devil Fruits would interact. Whilst Blackbeard can pull Kid in with his Darkness Fruit, Kid can repel Blackbeard with the Magnet Fruit. Blackbeard does have metal on him, from his earrings, belt buckle, rings, and even the pistols he carries on his person, so Kid could very well repel Blackbeard, leaving them in a tug-of-war scenario, with Blackbeard constantly trying to pull Kid in, but Kid constantly repelling Blackbeard away. I have not even mentioned Kid's Awakening or Blackbeard's Quake Fruit yet. If Blackbeard can't reach Kid to turn off his Devil Fruit, he could always spam the Quake Fruit against him, but even with that, it is going to take a lot to destroy Kid's Punk Rotten. Punk Rotten is extremely durable, as Kid was able to survive a Spear of Elbath from Big Mom using it. Big Mom's Spear of Elbath is extremely powerful, as it eviscerates anything in its path. King Bomb and Onigashima itself are great examples. Even when Blackbeard eventually destroys Punk Rotten, it doesn't matter. Like Kid said, it was scrapped to begin with. He could easily reconstruct Punk Rotten, leaving them in the same situation. Then we get to Kid's Awakening, and to be honest, I don't see Kid's Awakening being very useful in this matchup. When Kid uses a sign on his opponents, there is a visible mark on them to show that they are now magnetic. With the Darkness Fruit, Blackbeard would be able to remove that magnetic effect on him, making Kid's Awakening useless in this matchup. But that is enough about Kid versus Blackbeard for now. What about the other fighters? The other Kid Pirates are there, but we don't know what they can do or how strong they are, so I am not going to factor them in too much here. In terms of the other combatants, I don't see Burgess, Doc Q, or Van Augur being a threat to Killer. They would destroy the rest of the Kid Pirates, but Killer is flat out above all of them. Killer has speed comparable to Zoro at times, with Zoro even saying that Killer was strong during their fight. He also has solid durability and endurance, taking a full Gora and Indra attack from Big Mom, as well as multiple cheap shots from Hawkins during their fight. Killer would have a hard time reaching Doc Q since he can't fly, but Doc Q isn't very threatening. We already know that strong enough Haki negates his Devil Fruit. He does have a scythe and exploding apples, but the apples were barely effective against the Heart Pirates, so they are not going to be effective against Killer. If Doc Q does try to close the distance and attack Killer with his scythe, that is a very quick way for him to get low diffed. When looking at Burgess versus Killer, it is not close. Killer's speed would be a nightmare for Burgess, and Killer has attacks that negate physical defense and deal internal damage, and can even damage Kaido. Now overall, how do I see this fight playing out? If you were paying attention, you noticed that I did not mention Van Augur very often. That is because he would be Blackbeard's ace in the hole. I mentioned how Blackbeard and Kid's fruits could lead to them being in a tug-of-war situation, but that is where Van Augur comes in. With the Warp Fruit, Van Augur could warp Blackbeard straight to Kid to turn off his Devil Fruit, and land massive attacks with the Quake Fruit. Even if Kid used his Awakening on Blackbeard or any of his crewmates, the Warp Fruit would allow them to bypass this effect. You might have also noticed that I did not mention Kid's strongest attack, the Damned Punk. That is because I can't really see Kid landing it in this fight. Even if by some chance he does land the attack on Blackbeard, I don't see one Damned Punk being enough to take down Blackbeard. Vanaughter would be able to maneuver Blackbeard and his crewmates out of harm's way instantly. Even if Kid or Killer tried to go after Vanaughter, he could just warp away to dodge their attacks. Killer would also have to babysit the rest of the Kid pirates, so they don't get decimated by Burgess and Doc Q. With the combination of Blackbeard and Vanaughter, they would be able to outmaneuver Kid and chip him down until there is nothing left. Even if Killer beats Doc Q and Burgess, once Blackbeard and Vanaughter come for him, that is GG's. I do think Blackbeard would beat Kid in a 1 vs 1 eventually, but with Vanaughter there as well, that is too much. Although I see Kid putting up a better fight than Law did, it still would not be enough to take down Blackbeard. I see Blackbeard taking the win. Alright, now we get to Egghead Island. There is a lot going on here, so I'm not going to cover everything that happens on Egghead, just most of the major fights. This section has more of a combat focus, but near the end of the video, I will go over the problems the Kid Pirates would have at Egghead Island compared to what the Strawhats had to face. And for this section, to give the Kid Pirates a fair chance, they would go into each fight with 100% health. Their opponents would also be at 100% health as well, so someone like Rob Lucci who fought Luffy and Zoro would be at 100% health for both of those fights, just to keep it fair. Whether they win a fight or lose a fight, the Kid Pirates would go into their next fight at full health. This way, I actually have the chance to talk about all of the potential fights at Egghead Island. For the story implications chapter of the video, Kid and his crew would not always be at 100% health, so we can get a more accurate representation of how far the Kid Pirates could go at Egghead Island. To make things easier to follow in general, if Luffy fights someone on Egghead, I will substitute Luffy for Kid, and the same applies for Zoro. Zoro's fights would be substituted for Killer instead, so with that out of the way, let's get started. Now the first important skirmish on Egghead was Luffy vs Lucci, so instead we will have Kid vs Lucci. Luffy made this fight look a lot easier than it is. Lucci was strong enough to clash against Luffy in Gear 5, and had enough endurance to take multiple hits from this form of Luffy. Lucci also has incredible speed, so it could be hard for Kid to land significant hits on Lucci, but Lucci would lack the power to put down Kid for good. We have seen Kid eat a punch from Big Mom and take little to no damage from it. He has even been hit by Big Mom's Spear of Elbaf, Fulgora, and the 3000 Leagues of Misery, and he still kept fighting even after all of that. Even if Rob Lucci lands his strongest attack on Kid, it would not be enough to secure the win. I also want people to take into account the environment they would be fighting in. Egghead Island is a giant laboratory, meaning there is metal everywhere. The entire laboratory would essentially be Kid's domain. He would be able to manipulate the ground, the ceiling, the walls, and even the buildings inside of Egghead Island, not to mention the many creations of Dr. Vegapunk scattered across the island. During the raid on Onigashima, Kid had to run around collecting metal that he would need to fight against Big Mom and Kaido, but at Egghead Island, that is already done for him. In this environment, with the abundance of metal around him, Kid's Devil Fruit would function similar to Katakuri Doflamingo's awakening, in the way that he would be able to control his environment and use it as a weapon. This concept would apply to all of Kid's fights going forward. Although Lucci has a lot of techniques, the environment itself would be another weapon in Kid's arsenal. It would only be a matter of time before Kid uses his Devil Fruit awakening and locks down Lucci, allowing Kid to land whichever attack he wants. Lucci does have the Iron Body technique to defend himself, but we have already seen that strong enough attacks can break through that technique. Even if Lucci is strong enough to survive a Damned Punk from Kid, which is a big if, once Kid hits him with another Damned Punk, the fight is over. In a different environment, maybe this fight could have been closer, but on Egghead Island, Kid is walking away with the win. Next would be the brief encounter between Zoro and Kaku. Considering Zoro fought Kaku, Killer fighting Kaku seems appropriate. This fight was abruptly ended by Stussy, so the real question is, can Killer stall Kaku long enough for Stussy to incapacitate Kaku and Lucci? And I think he can. Killer has the Punishers as his main weapons of choice. He was able to damage Kaido using Sonic Scythes, and he does have speed comparable to Zoro. I could see Killer giving Kaku a good fight before Stussy incapacitates him and Lucci. If you're wondering what would happen if this fight was not interrupted, I do still see Killer walking away with the W. Considering his feats in Wano, and the fact that he can bypass Kaku's durability and deal internal damage with Sonic Scythes, Killer is also surprisingly durable as I have mentioned before. He would have the speed to keep up with Kaku, and techniques to deal serious damage. Killer is more than equipped to fight Kaku, and I see him taking the win. Next is the Seraphim vs Kid and Killer. During the Egghead arc, Luffy and Zoro released Lucci and Kaku and fought alongside them against the Seraphim. You could argue that Kid and Killer could do the same, but I personally think Kid is way too stubborn to work with Lucci and Kaku. So how does this fight play out? Killer is smart enough to figure out how the Seraphim are more durable with their flames on and faster with their flames off, so I don't think that would be an issue. Kid can remove S-Hawk's sword with his ability, leaving S-Hawk to rely on his Devil Fruit and his lasers. Kid could also use a sign to lock down the Seraphim in place, giving Killer the opportunity to land Sonic Scythes and deal damage to the Seraphim. Whether the Seraphim's flames are on or off, Sonic Scythes would be able to deal damage to the Seraphim. I think this strategy would work against S-Hawk, but not against S-Bear. S-Bear has the Paw Fruit just like Kuma, and with that ability, he would be able to teleport even if Kid uses his awakening against him. Just like Kuma can send people across the world, you could argue that S-Bear could do the same, so the threat of a ring-out victory is always there. The Seraphim are still very powerful in general, but their lack of experience or use of Hockey in general leads me to believe that Kid and Killer would walk away with the victory. Following what happened to the Strawhats on Egghead Island, the next major fight would be Killer versus Lucci. Zoro had a fight against Lucci which lasted for quite some time, but unlike that fight, this explanation will not be that long. Lucci outclasses Killer in just about every area. Lucci took multiple hits from Gear 5 Luffy, and even survived an attack from Zoro, which is stronger than any attack Killer has. Lucci's armament hockey is also very impressive. Not only did he clash against Luffy, but he blocked an attack from Zoro with his leg. This is impressive considering that Zoro specializes in armament hockey, as stated by Oda, and he was using Enma and the Sandai Kitetsu. Zoro was also using armament hockey at the time, and we all know how strong Enma is as a blade. This means that even if Killer could attack Rob Lucci, he would not be able to put down Lucci for good. Lucci has every advantage over Killer. This fight goes to Rob Lucci. Now we have another major fight, Eustass Kid versus Navy Admiral Kizaru. Kid does have the environment to use as his own weapon, thanks to his Devil Fruit, but he can't move the metal in his surroundings at the speed of light, so it is hard to see him hitting Kizaru with that approach. Kizaru is also a weird character to discuss. Let me explain. We have seen quite a few characters clashing with him throughout the series, from Rayleigh to Marco and even Luffy. We've even seen someone like Sentomaru reacting to Kizaru's speed, and even Sanji reacted to Kizaru's attack. So characters are able to react to his speed in general, but there are clearly different levels to Kizaru's speed. There were several times where Kizaru moved so fast that even Luffy couldn't react to him. Luffy was fully focused on fighting Kizaru, whilst Kizaru was only fighting Luffy in between trying to eliminate Dr. Vegapunk. Luffy got blitzed by Kizaru when he was using Gear 4 Snake Man. Luffy was not able to react to Kizaru's kick, and was sent with enough force to break one of Vegapunk's robots carrying the Thousand Sunny. Kid is very durable, so I could see him taking some of those hits. Whilst I do see Kid being able to react to Kizaru's lower levels of speed, his observation hockey and attack speed are not where they need to be to fight Kizaru at his higher levels of speed. To say that Kid would never hit Kizaru would be a stretch, but in general, Kid would have a very hard time landing consistent hits on Kizaru. It was hard for Luffy to hit Kizaru, and his attack speed far exceeds Kid's. Luffy had to use Gear 5 just to fight Kizaru, the same form he needed to fight against Kaido, and it was evident that Kizaru was not using his full strength during their fight. The same attacks that Kid landed on Big Mom and Kaido would be extremely hard to land on Kizaru. If Kid is able to apply his Devil Fruit Awakening to Kizaru, then maybe he could do some serious damage. But again, Kizaru's speed would make this very difficult for Kid. As a Logia user, Kizaru can change his form at will, so even if Kid tries to apply his magnetism to Kizaru, Kizaru would be able to dodge oncoming attacks thanks to his Logia properties. Overall, I don't think Kid is well equipped to fight someone as fast as Kizaru. You could argue that since Kizaru is conflicted about putting down Dr. Vegapunk, that this could allow Kid to get a few cheap shots in during their fight, which may be the case. Despite all of the advantages that Kid would have with the environment, I don't see it being enough to defeat Kizaru. But if we look at this from the perspective of Kizaru being fully focused on defeating Kid, then the difficulty would be even lower. Either way, Kizaru takes it. Finally, we get to the final fight, Eustass Kid versus Saint J. Garcia Saturn. Kizaru did play a part in this fight, so Luffy did have to fight Kizaru and Saturn, but obviously if Kizaru and Saturn jump Kid, he will lose. So for the sake of this scenario, and to keep things interesting, I am going to keep this as a 1 versus 1. Now there is a lot going on in this fight. Saturn has some attacks that have not been fully explained, so we don't know the specifics on how they work, such as his weird eye attacks that were strong enough to damage Sanji despite his exoskeleton. He has exploding venom, sharp spikes at the end of his legs, and just like the other 5 elders, he has a healing factor that allows him to regenerate from pretty much every attack. Saturn is a weird character to gauge in terms of overall strength. Some people believe that he is stronger than Kizaru, but I am not one of those people. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, Kid's Punk Rotten is extremely durable, even being able to survive a spear of Elbaf from Big Mom. Saturn has shown a few attacks, but I don't see any of those attacks being strong enough to destroy Kid's Punk Rotten. But on the flip side, we have seen Saturn regenerate from attacks very similar to Kid's attacks. Luffy squashing Saturn and Kizaru is comparable to Kid's Punk Vice attack. Saturn getting hit by Frankie's Radical Beam is comparable to Kid's Damned Punk. Even if these attacks are not exactly equal in terms of strength, the point is that Saturn is going to heal after all of these attacks. It is important to note that even though Saturn regenerates from attacks, he does not ignore attacks like Marco. He does take damage, or he is sent flying and then he regenerates. And this is what I think is the most important part of this fight. Kid would be able to dominate Saturn with his Devil Fruit, squashing and smacking around Saturn fairly consistently. Even some of Saturn's best techniques would lack the power to put down Kid. Luffy figured out that the 5 elders can't die, so I am sure Kid would figure that out as well. Since Saturn is seemingly immortal, Kid would have to change his strategy during the fight. We have seen Kid attach metal to Big Mom and then easily repel her with his Devil Fruit, and Big Mom is heavy. So I would argue that Kid could do the same to Saturn. Kid also has the entire laboratory as his weapon, so he would be able to create a large metal box, just like what he did to Zeus on the rooftop. The only way I see Kid being able to defeat Saturn is by throwing him into a large box, like I mentioned earlier, and just throwing him into the ocean, for a cheap ring-out victory. As of the recording of this video, the most recent chapter is chapter 1123. Maybe Saturn pulls out something crazy that would put him above Kid for me, but as of right now with everything I've seen, I don't think Saturn is as strong as an Admiral, and I could see him losing to Kid in a 1 vs 1, via a ring-out victory. People are free to disagree, but I see Kid walking away with this win. And after Saturn, the other Elders appear, and obviously Kid and his crew are not defeating the 5 Elders. I really don't need to go in depth on what would happen here. So I approached this what if with more of a combat focus in mind at first, but for those wondering how the other characters would react to the Kid pirates going to Egghead, here it is. Vegapunk wanted to meet Luffy, so the Strawhats did not really have to fight the Pacifistas or the Vegapunks. Kid also wouldn't work with Bonnie, and he wouldn't care about her problems or helping out Kuma. So there is also a very high chance that Bonnie doesn't survive the arc, and that's if the Kid pirates even save her at sea, which is debatable. The Seraphim were also the Straw Hats' allies at various points during the arc, and Vegapunk was the Straw Hats' ally for the entire arc. This would not be the case for Kid. Because of Kid's reputation as a violent pirate, Vegapunk would not allow Kid to enter Egghead so easily. Kid would have to fight the Vegapunks, Pacifistas, and robots guarding the island. The Kid pirates would also have to fight the Seraphim, CP0, and the Marines throughout the arc. If Kid and his crew did not go into all of the fights at 100% health, I could see Lucci doing about 30 to 50% of Kid's health during their fight, and Kaku doing about 50 to 80% of Killer's health during their fight, depending on how close you think those fights could be. It would be debatable whether Kid and Killer could beat S-Hawk and S-Bear after these fights, even if they got some rest like Luffy and Zoro did after their fights. Even if they somehow managed to beat the Seraphim, once Kizaru shows up, that is a wrap. Kid and Killer would not be anywhere near 100% health, and Kizaru would stomp them both pretty easily, considering their injuries. Saturn would never really have to leave his ship, and all of the Vegapunks and Stussy would be eliminated. Vegapunk's message would likely get shut down, and people would not learn the truth about the world. Kid and his crew would either be completely wiped out, or they would get sent to Impel Down. So overall, the Kid pirates would not have a good time at Egghead Island. But there you have it. This is what I think would happen if Eustass Kid fought Blackbeard or went to Egghead Island. Do you agree or disagree with these takes? Let me know what you think in the comments. The next video will be what if Law went to Egghead Island or fought Shanks. If that is something you might be interested in, make sure to subscribe. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video or a dislike if you didn't, and consider subscribing for more videos like this in the future. Thanks for watching.